Okay. Yeah, so I have another batch of questions and comments from the audience. So we'll go over those, and then there's a couple of them that I think will turn into a bigger discussion.
All right.
So I'll just hop into it. First one is regarding the episode we did on CDRs, on continuing disability review. That's what it stands for.
Yep.
When you get approved for benefits, and then Social Security basically investigates you sometime in the future to make sure that you're still eligible for the program. This person says, my diary date was 5 to 7 years. I am due for a CDR this year. I am 63. Am I still as likely to get a CDR as a younger person?
Great question, and the answer is no. She's not going to get a CDR at 63. The way the law was written is there are short diaries, medium diaries, and then what they call permanent diaries. And of course, in Social Security speak, they put a limit on permanent diaries, and it's the 7-year diary. Because if it's permanent, why would there even be a year? She's got a permanent diary. And at 63, they're not going to review it. In fact, the cutoff is, unless specifically in the file from someone, usually a judge, says, we need to review this case in 3 years, or we need to review this case in 18 months. Unless there's something specific like that, if you're 52 and a half at the time of the decision, you can expect a permanent diary. It's going to, and it's a 5 to 7 year diary, and I don't even think that it triggers a hit with Social Security. And I say this, of course, I'm now 22 years removed from working for Social Security, but one of the jobs that I did the longest when I was with Social Security is I was a CDR examiner. I actually did CDR cases, and I knew about diaries and stuff like that, and I saw where they came from, which was usually when a judge approves you, they would, if they felt that your condition was going to improve, they would give a specific diary. Otherwise, they just assigned you these. They're boilerplate. That's what they are. They're just, at such and such age, the system will automatically say, you're assigned a permanent diary. And if you're assigned a permanent diary, you're just not going to trigger. So if she's 63 or he's 63, no,
Yeah.
you're not going to get reviewed again.
And then probably even if they were 53 then.
No, 53. Yeah. The only time somebody 52 and a half or older at the time of the decision would get reviewed is if earnings triggered it, or if something came in, a lot of time, if you're having, a huge split in your family, and, Uncle Bill's going to call Social Security and say, "Hey, you need to review them. They're working, just because he wants to get you in trouble, or maybe you are working, and then that'll trigger it." But there's some things that can trigger a CDR. Usually, if you're younger, that's gonna happen, and those are usually 3-year diaries. Every 3 years supposedly. They don't have the staffing to do that though.
It's just in theory, it's going to be 3 years.
That's what. When we did them, like I said, when I was working there, many moons ago, they were just triggered. I mean, the administration, something in their antiquated system triggered a CDR, and then we'd work them. The majority of them, and I'm getting off topic here, but I think I answered her question. She's not going to get a CDR, but the majority of CDRs they're approved or they're continued, is what they call them. They continue to be disabled. And we did talk about this in a prior podcast, and I'll just sum it up. Social Security has proved that you've gotten better, one, and that you've gotten better enough to the point where now you can perform full-time work. And the burden of proof, which is always on us in regular cases, is completely on Social Security in a CDR case. They have the burden to prove that, one, you got better, and two, you got so much better that you can work now. That is a huge burden to overcome, and that's why most of CDRs are just continued.
Yep. Okay, nice. Yeah, we did a whole episode on that. I think it's called, I think it's just labeled, "What if they stop my benefits?" or something like that. But yeah. Okay. Next question. This is regarding getting treatment from your doctor. We just put out a video about how important treatment is, how important it is to have ongoing treatment as your case is pending, not just see your doctor once, but having some kind of ongoing treatment. And this person says they are being treated regardless of their office visits if the doctor is giving them medication and they get it by mail order.
They said that, or they asked that? Because
Well,
if
they said that.
If they said that, they're absolutely wrong.
Yeah. That's what they said. They are
yeah.
being treated regardless of their office visits if they're getting medication.
Yeah, getting medication by mail order is going to do nothing to help your case, because there's not going to be any office notes that, Mr. Smith came in and I'm going to renew his prescription, but he came in because he's had difficulty with his back pain.
Yeah.
He was having a hard time getting on and off the examining table. His gait was antalgic, which just means painful. He looked like he was in pain when he was walking. And they give these findings from a medical professional. It could be a nurse, it could be a physician's assistant, it could be the doctor himself. But they're findings. You came into the office, you had these problems and these problems and these problems, and now they're documented in the medical record. Now, the medical record will show, it's been 90 days since I prescribed this 90-day supply of X amount or X type of medication, and I'm renewing it. I'm renewing the prescription, calling in the renewal.
Yep.
How in the world does that help your disability case? What kind of treatment are you saying that is? I mean, it does nothing to advance your case. There's nothing that I can grab and say, oh, yeah. You can see, this person was so disabled that they didn't go into the office or anything. They didn't really talk to the doctor about the problems that they were having, because it's not documented anywhere like that. But doggone it, they got their 90-day supply renewed for another 90 days.
Yeah.
That's not medical treatment. Don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but that's not going to help me win your case.
Only thing it proves is that they do have a doctor. There is someone that knows about their conditions.
Yeah.
So start seeing them. If you're getting medication, then start seeing them.
And I would say this. I mean, I'm going to leapfrog it, because this seems to be a problem that people don't quite understand. The representative community struggles with, and that is getting medical opinions, getting a medical source statement, getting a brief narrative about something. If you're calling in and saying, hey, I'm out of such and such, and I need you to renew my prescription, that's great. But why don't you call your doctor and say, listen, can I run by, Disability Consulting has sent me this form. It looks like you could probably do it in 5 minutes, and you're my medical provider. You've seen me, X amount of times. Can I just bring it by, and we'll do 10 minutes for you to fill out this form? Because if Social Security gets a medical source statement, then my job gets a lot easier, because now I've got somebody who's got medical credentials providing an opinion that at some point I actually dare Social Security to, just reject that medical opinion. Mm-hmm. Those of us who worked for DDS, doing disability adjudication, what the criteria is for that, you got to have a college degree. Now, I'm not going to tell you what my college degree is when I worked for them, but I have a college degree. I will tell you that not one moment of my college degree, I have 2 of my college degrees, not one moment of any of that time that I spent getting those college degrees was spent on medical issues.
Yeah.
I have no credentialing when I started 35 years ago with disability, no credentialing at all about medical issues. And so when you have a doctor or a nurse or a physician's assistant or a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist who weighs in, and they could do it freehand in a paragraph, or they fill out our little form, which is basically circling some boxes and then saying, this is why I circled the box. That's it. I submit that. It's basically golden. Okay. Now I've got somebody who has credentials. You ain't got no credentials medically. I'm going to put my client's doctor or physician's assistant or nurse or therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist, I'm going to put them up against you. What's your degree in again? English?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. I'm going to put it up against you. Or even, and this sounds like I'm, being condescending to judges, and I am not, Okay, they've got the medical degree, Your Honor, and you're a lawyer, right? And how much medical training did you have being zero? That's right. That's right. He's an MD or the physician's assistant. They're a nurse. They've seen my client for 15 years. You have no medical training whatsoever. I'm going to put this opinion up against what you're looking at in the case file, and the judges, by the way, they acknowledge that. In many hearings, they actually call a medical expert because they're not a doctor. They'll say it. I'm not a doctor. I can't opine on this. So, anyway, I know it's a little bit off topic, but if you think that getting your prescriptions filled, and you have to go through something to do that, call the office or something like that. If you think that's helping your case, it's not providing me any help at all to argue your case. But if you went to the trouble of calling your doctor and say, I'm out of such and such, and can you, refill my prescription? Why not do what we've asked you to do from the beginning? Because we will be asking you every time you call us or we call you. We're going to ask you. We need to get some opinion evidence from your providers. Could you take your doctor this form? It's a 2-page form. Take them 5 minutes to fill out.
Yeah. If you just think about it logically, getting medication, the way that you still qualify for disability while you're on medication is that you're still disabled despite the medication.
Yeah.
And if you, for example, a couple examples, if you have a seizure disorder and you're having seizures, but then your medication is controlling the seizures,
you are not disabled.
You're not disabled anymore. And so just getting medication every 90 days for your seizures, as far as Social Security is concerned, that could just be controlling it.
Right,
Same with pain medication, controlling your pain enough to where you can go back to work.
And some
anything like that.
Yeah, some keys to the kingdom. In a disability hearing where you're being questioned by the judge and you're being questioned by me, it will always come up, do you take any medication for any of your conditions? Pain medication for physical conditions, seizure medication. And the first question is, do you take it? And then the second, if you say yes, the second question is, does it help?
Yeah.
And then the question after that, depending on your answer, no, not really, would be, well, have you talked to your doctor about switching up your medications if it's not helping? But then if you testify that it does help, now you're going to have to say, okay, well, it helps, but it doesn't help enough where I can actually go out and work 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely, that's a great point.
Yep. Okay. All right, so we'll leave it there. And then the next question... it's not a question, just a comment on one of our videos, and we get this all the time. It's just someone that says, I'm forced to work every day in pain because I can't afford to be off work long enough to qualify. I'll work until I drop. It's a sad system.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that. I really don't. But there is no provision. There's nothing that we can do to kick against that. There are, every week that I've been in business, 22 years that I've been practicing, 35 years, in Social Security disability. But since I opened my practice, there really hasn't been a week that has passed that we haven't got a call from somebody who said, I need you to take my case, I'm going to apply, but I don't think I can go through the process alone. And when did you last work? Oh, well, I'm still working, but I'm at the end of my rope. I'm going to have to quit. If I can make it in the next 2 months, it'll be a miracle. And we're not being heartless, but I can't file a claim for you while you are still gainfully employed. I cannot do that. You can't do it on your own. You have to be out of work. So, if you cut back your hours and you're under the limit, that might be something that we take, but probably not even then. To make a really good argument, I really need to see a clean break. What happened? Something must have happened to where it got so bad that you just can't work at all anymore. And there might be kind of a natural progression you would see in some chronic disease. It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Musculoskeletal problems, orthopedic problems, those are the ones that we see that happening a lot. For example, somebody has a surgery 5 years ago and they go back to work. And they're able to work for a while, and then, for the last, year or so, you notice that their attendance is they're missing, 2 or 3 days a month, or they're leaving early, or they're arriving late. And then there is the clean break. I just can't do it anymore. Okay, well, that's indicative of disability. But asking me to make an application for you or take your case when you're gainfully employed, one, I won't, and two, it's because I can't. I can't say you're disabled if you're still gainfully employed. And do I like that system? No, I wish there was some kind of a provision, but I've never seen one even floated out there. And like I said, I've been doing this for 35 years. I've never seen a provision like, well, somebody's really bad off. They're still working and they're still gainfully employed, but they're really bad off, and let's go ahead and start processing a case in the event that they do have to quit or they get fired because their performance is so bad, because their conditions are so bad. There's no provision for that. There's nothing ever been floated that I've seen. It's basically always been you are unable to perform any type of work on a sustained basis. It's a condition that has lasted 12 months or is expected to last 12 months or result in death. That's always been the definition of disability. And it's really, again, it's impossible for me to file a claim on somebody who's gainfully employed. So I don't necessarily disagree with the person that left that comment, but there is no provision and there's nothing, there's no way around, Social Security law.
Yeah, because it's Social Security disability in particular is just referring to your ability to work. It's not a program to make accommodations while you're working. It's not a program to help you out while you're in pain and you're working full time. It is you're disabled if you are unable to work gainfully. That's how they define it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the hardest conversations, because we're not disagreeing. That's like, you're in horrible pain. I believe you. There's just nothing that we could do. You could have the best medical case in the entire country, and you could be the best representative in the entire country, and there's a 0% chance that we could win the case.
Yeah. Yeah, early on in one of our really early podcasts, I talked about a woman, a lovely woman, who I worked with back when I was with disability, and she was a triple amputee. I mean, she's not a quadriplegic, she's the triplegic. Mm-hmm. And she worked, and she was a gem. She was like an asset to disability. She actually had a knowledge way beyond most of us who worked there. Was she disabled? And under the definition of Social Security disability, no. Why wasn't she disabled? Because she was gainfully employed. The day that she stopped working, she's disabled. Because her impairments are so severe that you would expect her to be unable to work. There it is. But as long as she was employed, even with those horrendous limitations, she's not disabled.
Yeah. You can't tell Social Security you're unable to work while you're still working. They're going to look at you and say,
yeah.
Repeat that back to me.
And then on the tail end, we see that a lot. We see the phone calls
mm-hmm.
that we get a lot. But it's really on the tail end that we see this a lot. And we haven't had, I don't think, too much discussion on this on the podcast, but it really is a problem that we see often. And that is, we're getting close to a hearing. My client's been denied twice. They got denied at the initial level. They got denied at the reconsideration level. We've applied asked for a hearing, and we're getting close to a hearing. And all of a sudden, Social Security makes the entire case record open for us, along with earnings reports. By the way, when they make the file open to us early on, they don't give us earning reports. Try to figure out why, but they don't. But then at the hearing level, they do.
Mm-hmm.
They run earnings reports, and oftentimes we will scroll through that when we're doing the case review and say, okay, well, let's see what they found in the earnings report. And usually you see a new hire, and that's in the quarter that they were hired. And then you'll see, $8,000 in that quarter. And then the next quarter, $11,000 in that quarter. It's like, the first thing we do, are you working? Well, yeah, I had to do something. Okay. All right. So when you say that, because we're going to go in front of a hearing, I mean, we've already scheduled the hearing, we're going to go there. When the judge asks you about these earnings and you say, I had to do something, congratulations, you just lost your disability case. 100% of the time, you have lost your disability case. Because disability, Social Security disability, is not for folks who, well, they just had to go back to work, They're for people who can't go back to work. So if you say, I had to do something, we had bills, my spouse was laid off from their job and bills are piling up, we have to eat. So if you really push yourself, you can work. Is that what you're testifying to, or is that what you're telling Social Security you can do? Because if you do, you're not disabled under the law. And it's heartless, it sounds callous, it sounds mean, but it's the truth. And, what my clients will find with me and my employees, we're going to tell you the truth. And sometimes it might sting, but it's going to save you a lot of pain in the long run. It's certainly going to save you a lot of time. If we tell you the truth, hey, you don't have a case. You told us that you weren't working, and then 2 months after, we signed, you didn't tell us that you went to work, and then we found out that you have been working. You never were out 12 months. You don't meet the definition of disability. There is no case. We don't need to go in front of a judge. We're going to withdraw your request for hearing, and we're done. We're not going to waste your time. You're not going to waste our time. We're not going to waste Social Security's time. It will save you a lot of pain. So it might sting when we tell you the truth, but we're going to shoot straight with you, and that's something that we see a lot. I had to do something. It's the worst thing ever you could tell Social Security, because what you're saying is, I'm not really disabled, but because I can do something if I really have to. If I have to feed my kids, if I have to make the car note, if I have to pay rent, I'll go to work. But that's not who the disability program's for. The disability program's for people who, even if they had to do all that kind of stuff, their body or their mind would not let them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it sounds harsh, but like you said, it's going to sting, but it'll sting a lot less if they just let us know ahead of time.
Yeah,
it stings the worst when you don't learn about it until you're in the hearing with the client. And that goes with everything, earnings or any kind of surprises in the case. If you just let us know about it early, it's going to be a lot less of a problem.
Yeah. We've talked about that because your medical records, it's interesting. Most clients, and I guess I'm the same way, and you're probably the same way with your doctor. You get chatty with them, and what we'll see a lot of times is they won't tell us a word about any kind of marijuana use or alcohol use, and then you get their medical records later in the process, and it's like, you told us that you don't drink or you don't do it. It looks like you had a bender for like 2 weeks. Yeah. Sometimes I get carried away. It shows that you've been through a rehab for crack. I mean, you told us that you never had a drug history. Oh yeah, well I guess I forgot that.
Yeah.
And we find on the medical records, because you tell your doctors that, and the judges see that, the Social Security Administration sees that. We have all the time in a hearing, we'll have a judge, he'll say to me, not to my client, to me, Mr. Groves, turn to Exhibit 3F, page 222. Oh, and then you see, claimant reports that, his job is going well.
Yeah.
What? Or patient reports that his job is going well. What job we talking about? Well, I had to do something. And it's in your medical records. You told your doctor that your job's going well. You didn't tell us that you were working. You didn't tell Social Security you're working. Things are about to get really bad for you in a hearing.
Yeah.
And it would have been much less painful for you if you just told us up front, and we could have told Social Security up front.
Yeah,
Anyway.
or the client tells us that they've never had any kind of substance abuse, and then the medical records show that they were telling their doctor about what a crazy night they just had.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like, that's going to come up no matter what.
Yeah, it's going to be in your medical records. Any kind of earnings that you report to your doctors, jobs, because they'll ask, if you've ever been to a doctor, you know that one of the forms that you fill out at the front desk is who's your employer, what are you doing, and then when you get back in the room, they'll ask you, what kind of job, what kind of work have you done, a lot of times because they have to, determine whether they need to give you a note to, this person was in my office for this impairment. That's why they missed, that day of work. Which, by the way, those don't help us at all either. We need to know about chronicity, which is how long chronic conditions have lasted and what they're expected to limit you in doing.
Okay, I'm going to move to the next question. This one should be pretty short, but it's a common question, so I'll include it. Person says, I was denied for lack of work points. What does that mean?
Lack of work credits is probably what they meant. To be insured for Title II SSDI, you have to have worked 5 out of the last 10 years to become insured for benefits. That's just the rules. And if you have not worked enough to have done those 5 out of 10 years, you're not going to be insured. And so your only other option at that point is SSDI or SSI, supplemental security income. And SSI has income and resource limits on it, which, are oftentimes for anybody who's, got a savings account. They've got some investments. They got a 401k. They have, maybe, a tidy little savings account. They have a really cool Harley Davidson, beyond their vehicle. So they don't qualify because SSI has income and resource limits, and they're tiny. They're very low. So you have to be insured if you want to get SSDI. And SSDI, it's under Title II. There's 2 titles in Social Security. There's Title II, which is SSDI, and there's Title 16, which is SSI. Title 16 is SSI is part of the old welfare law. It's a needs-based program. You don't have to have worked to get it. Pretty much all childhood cases, because they haven't worked, are on SSI or applying for SSI. People who haven't worked very long don't have the work credits, which is what this commenter was talking about. But they don't have resources either that makes them ineligible. So that's what we see as far as that goes. But yeah, it's being uninsured for disability benefits under Title II SSDI. That's not uncommon either. We see that more and more with people that either have very little earnings history, or their earnings are really sporadic and low, and so there is a threshold that they have to get above for those earnings to actually be counted, those quarters to be counted. So again, 5 out of 10. If you just remember 5 out of 10 years, you have to have earnings to be insured for benefits.
Yeah, and not consecutive. 5 out of the past 10 years total.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, next question. This is, we did a video about grid rules and what's the difference between getting your disability when you're over 50 versus under 50, because it gets a lot easier when you're over 50 because they look at the case differently.
Yeah.
And that's what we were trying to communicate, but the person that commented says, so I'm screwed. I'm 53 and I became disabled at 49 and haven't worked since, but since I had a master's degree and worked as a nurse practitioner, I will get denied.
No, that's not true. So if they became disabled at 49, the criteria that Social Security would be looking at under the age 49 is for a younger individual. And yeah, at that age, Social Security would have to find that you can't do any type of work at all. You couldn't even do a sedentary sit-down job to where you're, putting pieces of something together. You're not dealing with anybody. You're not using your brain much. It's basically a very simple, repetitive job, and you sit down all day long. At 49 and younger, I have to prove you can't even do that job.
Yeah.
So the grid rules don't apply to people 49 and younger. The grid rules do apply when you hit 50, and they're 5-year rules. They change every 5 years. So people who are 50 to 54 are under one set of grid rules. People who are 55 to 59 are under another set of grid rules, and people who are 60 to 64 are under another set of grid rules. And as you would probably imagine, the older you get, the more prone Social Security is to allow your case, because the way the grid rules were written, the reason they were written is they realized at a certain age, and they realized it was 50, at a certain age, it's really hard for you to, just walk into employment. And that's basically what you have to be able to do in a Social Security case. If they determine that you can't do the job that you used to do, you have to be able to walk into another job. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time, you have to walk into another entry-level job, so an unskilled job. At 50, that's not as easy it is when you're a younger individual, which Social Security defines as 49 down to 18. So the grid rules are essentially, if you are this age with this education and this past work history, and then you're limited to this exertional level, the grid rules are going to apply. And they're called the grid rules because when you look at them, it's like there's stuff on a grid. If this and this and this and this happens, they are at the very end disabled. Okay, that grid's at such and such rule, and they just keep on going down. If this and this and this and they're not disabled. Okay, and you can get denied under the grid rules too. But the grid rules for representatives, they're really helpful because we can look at a case right out of the gate. 58-year-old who says they have horrible back problems, they can't be on their feet for very long, and they were a nurse or a nurse technician, which means that that's probably a medium job. They were lifting 50 pounds, maybe more, because if they were helping people get in and out of bed or in and off a table. But anyway, it's listed usually as a medium job. And now I already have a grid that I can use without even reading the medical records. Okay, well, they say they have this, they're this age, they have this education. I'm going to look on the grid, and there are a lot of instances on that grid, several, because there's not just one rule, there's several rules. But several rules say that they're disabled, and I think I can make that case. So that's the grid rule. To this guy specifically, or this gal specifically, let me just say this. You're not screwed. You are able to file a claim and possibly win that claim. You may not win it fully favorable, which is saying that we're not going to go back to when you were 49. But things change when you hit 50 because the rules change when you hit 50. So we do find that you're disabled. We're going to grid you as of your 50th birthday. That happens daily. That's not something that we see once in a while. We see that all the time. The judge will say, no, I'm not going back. They were 49 back then, so there's not a grid rule that I can apply. However, when they hit 50 on their birthday, this happened in a hearing this week. If you'll amend your client's onset to their 55th birthday, I'll approve the case on the record. My client, do you agree with that? Yes, of course you do. And in the hearing you just won. But that happens all the time. Their birthday changes, so the grid rule changes, and if it becomes more favorable to them, it is the difference between at 49 you're not disabled under the law, and at 50 you are. And so this guy would probably not be fully favorable. They might not go back to when you stopped working when you're 49, but if they allow you as of your 50th birthday. And he said he was 53 now, they owe you 3 years of back pay possibly. So, no, you're not screwed. It's not a hopeless case for you. It's just that you may not get a fully favorable decision.
Yeah. The way that I look at grid rules and the way that I try to talk about it is just it gets easier to win your case when you turn 50. It does not become easy. It just becomes easier. Yeah. But that also means it doesn't mean that it's impossible to win your case when you're under 50. It just means that it's a little bit harder, maybe depending on the case. So still apply if you think that you're unable to work, according to Social Security law. Still apply for the case. It doesn't, even if you're 48 or you're 38, if you think that you qualify, it might be a little bit more difficult. But that's not don't just assume that you'll get denied.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. We argue. Every single week, I have hearings where I'm arguing on cases with people in their 30s or their 40s, some in their 20s. I mean, every case is different. And we'll have had these discussions. By the time you get to the hearing level,
Yeah.
you will have had this discussion. If you're a 28-year-old, you'll have this discussion with your case manager. You'll have a discussion with me, your rep. Probably have a discussion with somebody else in the company too about, well, we have to prove this and we have to do this and these are the records that we need. Once again, it'd be great if we had an opinion. Okay, you're 28 years old. It'd be great if your doctor says, well, yeah, even though they're 28 years old, there's no way that they could stand for this amount of time. They couldn't sit for this amount of time. They'd be limited to lifting no more than 10 pounds. 5 minutes later, sign it. I've got an opinion. 28. I don't care if he's 28. His doctor says that he couldn't do anything.
Yep.
It's a really strong case.
Yep. Okay. And then closing thing with the grid rules, we've said this before, but just to be clear, they only apply to physical impairments.
Right. Yeah.
If you're applying for disability because of depression or anxiety or bipolar or schizophrenia or autism, some kind of behavioral or learning disability, the mental health stuff, there are no grids for that.
No.
And so if you're 45 versus 55, there's no difference.
That's right. Yeah, when I train my new employees come in and they're either if they're working in intake or if they're a new case manager, that's something that it's really hard for them to understand. Well, this person called in and they're 23 years old, and I just don't I don't think Social Security is going to approve this person. They're 23 years old. They're barely out of high school, for crying out loud. And then well, what's their allegation? Well, they're schizophrenic. Have they been hospitalized? Yeah, they've had 3 hospitalizations in the last couple of years. But they're 23. I don't care.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. And it really doesn't help them if they're 58.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're over 50, so supposedly you're on the grid rules. No, you're not if it's mental only, because the grid rules are talking about exertional levels: sedentary work, sit-down job; light work, a waitress, a cashier; medium work, a forklift operator, a over-the-road truck driver; heavy work, construction worker, drywall hanger, roofer, things like that. That's what the grid rules are based on. They're based on exertional levels: sedentary, light, medium, heavy. Well, not really heavy, because if you can do heavy work, you're not going to be on the grids at all. But mental health, no. I mean, there are no grid rules for that. So somebody who's schizophrenic with 3 hospital stays in the last 2 years, and they're 23, is no worse of a case than somebody who had those same kinds of problems, but they're 58. It doesn't help them that they're 58, but it doesn't hurt them that they're 23.
Yeah.
It's just it becomes really on the medical records and your symptoms. That's what it boils down to for mental health. And of course, this would be mental health only. So if you have both, let's say you have the schizophrenia, but you also have degenerative disc disease. Yeah. Okay, well then the grid rules could apply. If you're over 50.
Right. Okay. Good questions. Let's keep them coming.
All right.
If you have a question about your disability case, drop it in the comment section below, and we will do our best to answer it in the next episode.